Shane Cashman, and welcome to Tales from the Inverted World, Volume 2, Ghosts of the Civil War. Now a Timcast exclusive. The following story you are about to hear is true. The Witches in the Fitzpatrick Hotel, Part 2. A crow screamed at us in one of the trees at Rest Haven Cemetery. Clint and I were going to gather names from graves. I wanted to cross-reference some of the names I'd been reading about in the library with specific dates. I was interested in who fought in the Civil War, and if they had survived, how long did they live? I was working from the theory that the locals in 1865 had gotten their hands on some of the Confederate gold, and they'd kept it a secret the whole time. Perhaps the men who were young and broke during the war somehow found wealth in the following years. Perhaps their tombstones would offer me some clues. It was not easy to gain wealth after the war. Reconstruction was a failure, and Georgia was reeling from the ruin. I'd begun to suspect some of those young and desperate soldiers whose need for survival outweighed their loyalty to the Confederacy really did find a way to rob their own dying government, to enrich themselves and their town. The cemetery was necessary because you wouldn't believe how many people had similar names from the same area, and a tombstone was about as good, I'd hoped, as a birth certificate when it came to full names and dates. Clint told me that while I was gone, he'd actually met the man who he believed was the man in the red truck. He heard about him through his friend, the realtor, David Rainey. David said this man, Adam, lived near the Chenault plantation on the outskirts of Washington and was out there with trucks and backhoes digging up the place, presumably looking for gold. I'm not 100% sure it's him, but he's what the guy looked like, Clint said. He showed me a picture of Adam and shared screenshots of their conversation on Facebook. It seemed amiable, nothing threatening. Clint didn't ask whether or not he was the guy who showed up to his house, but rather asked if they could talk about the gold. The man wore a hat and had gray hair and a beard. A big guy. Clint said it's hard to remember his face because his eyes were covered with sunglasses. He also said that he'd played bingo with some of the old folks at the local VFW, and they all say the Chenault plantation was where you got to focus your efforts for the gold. The only problem was this was where Katrina and her TV show had contracts in place, and cameras strung up on trees throughout the property. In Rest Haven, I saw John T. Lindsay's tomb, who, come to find out, is not actually in his own grave, and beside his grave is a grave that's still without a name. Everyone in town called Lindsay Silver Fist because after he lost his hand in the Revolution, they fit the nub with a silver cuff. I'd found out that Silverfist just so happens to be buried on Clint's granddad's property, but no one can tell where the grave is anymore because the small wooden fence that once surrounded it had long since burnt. As we made our way through the paupers' graves, Clint's mom called. She said his grandparents had left for a little bit, and if we wanted to see the Hurd family graveyard, hidden deep in the property across the street, now was the time. "Just go now," she said. His parents knew how badly we wanted to see the graveyard. It'd been something we'd talked about since my first visit, but his grandparents were extremely protective of the land and the old graves within. It was something David Rainey said that made the Hurd family graveyard seem like a prime place to investigate the gold. He told us he believed the gold was in the graveyards, which made me think of David Dennard getting buried with Confederate gold on his chest. As a realtor, David Rainey has been in more houses and properties than most people in town. He said he's heard every story there is about the gold, and he was certain it was in those old and forgotten graves, the ones that dated back to the American Revolution. They were the kind of place to hide something as important as stolen gold. Sign up at timcast.com to watch the full episodes of Tales from the Inverted World, Ghosts of the Civil War.